Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Catholic Re.Con Testimonies from Reverts and Converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. And this week's guest is Joe McGivney. And I got to say, Joe, first of all, welcome. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Eddie. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. And I got to thank my good friend Dave Fortin, whose show you've been on, Joe. I think he texted me and said, "You've got to interview Joe!" Exclamation. And here we are. Now, Joe, there is a lot to your story. I know that much. And I know that your story was covered in the March issue, right, of last year, March issue of Columbia Magazine, the Knights of Columbus magazine. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so I will link to that article. I believe it's online for those of you that are interested to even, if we don't cover every last aspect of his testimony. But um, with that, Joe, I would love for you to take us back to maybe where it's relevant, maybe childhood, and how your Catholic journey began.
Sure. Um, my Catholic journey really began at birth, I guess. I was a cradle Catholic, born and raised on the south side of Chicago in a little part of the city, almost the southwest corner, that was predominantly Irish Catholic. Um, when I remember being in homeroom and they had, broken out our homerooms based on our last names alphabetically. So of course I was in a homeroom with all the M's, and it was Mick and Mick and Mick and McGivney, McEwen, McCown, and so on. So yeah, it was definitely a very Irish Catholic upbringing. I was baptized, made my first communion, my confirmation, um, and while I was raised Irish Catholic, I would say, looking back, I really just kind of was going through the motions, so to speak. I ultimately ended up attending an all boys Catholic high school in Chicago uh, before I went to college. And again, that finding that I guess connection with my faith and with God and with the church never clicked for me. Um, so as a result, once I reached the point where I didn't have to go to church, I didn't go. Um, and again, it was not because I was angry with the church or angry with God. I believed in God, but I, I guess maybe I was more interested in my world than anyone else's. I was pretty selfish. Um, so after I left high school, went off to college, I again just stopped going to church. And as time progressed, my life really was all about me. And going to church on Sundays, I didn't see where all about me fit in with that. So that was sort of my, you know, early part of my Catholic upbringing.
Well, when you say that once you didn't have to go, you didn't go. That's me. That describes me perfectly in my story and so many others. Now, when you say something didn't click, can you explain? Do you remember what that felt like in those early years when for something to not click? Because you say you're selfish, I get that, and that's how I was as well. Um, I would have said something so similar. It didn't click in that I didn't, I believed in God, but I didn't see how he was active here and now, I guess. And then I just walked away. It's really hard to explain. I was curious how you viewed all that.
Yeah, pretty similarly. Up until, frankly, a couple years ago, I I didn't pray. I didn't really know that I knew how to pray. Number one, number two, um, while I believed in God, I don't, especially as I got older and older and older and further and further and further away from my, Catholic upbringing. I just had this opinion that in my own head that, well, what would God want to do with someone like me? I was very flawed, and as I said, very selfish. So that connection, I mean, other than funerals and weddings, the only time that I just walked into a church to pray, I could probably count on one hand the number of times that happened. And it was usually when I really needed something. And even though I didn't believe, I thought, well, I'll light a candle and put a few bucks in the collection bin and hope for that God will help me out with this. But beyond that again, and I use the word often, that one-on-one connection just didn't exist for me.
Got it. When you say, I'm assuming this continued for a few decades. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it is accurate.
Okay.
I'm 59 now, and I really didn't come back to the church until just about 2 years ago.
Okay.
And that was following my, we call it my medical adventure, which, changed my life, changed my world.
Now, when you say medical adventure, was this related to COVID in any way?
It was. But to set that up a little bit, one thing that also in my early part of my life, which moved with me throughout my life, was that I was clearly an alcoholic. I had no interest in owning up to that. I was convinced that I wasn't. But in hindsight, I clearly was. My drinking in high school, I was kind of a weekend warrior, like a lot of kids my age where I grew up. And then when I went off to college, drinking became pretty much a part of my daily life. Some days it might be 1 or 2 beers after, studying for a few hours, and other times it was, like you see in movies. I was a college fraternity kid, acting out. But as I progressed through my adulthood, my love affair with alcohol continued, and it started to progress over time. So that you mentioned, what COVID had to do with it. When COVID started, as soon as it started, prior to that, my drinking had become pretty regular, and sometimes it was quite heavy. I used alcohol as a way of numbing my fears, my anxieties, my worries. And when COVID began, all of those fears just ramped up, warp speed. I was worried about everything. My income had dropped to virtually zero. I didn't know if my role in my industry would ever come back. I didn't know if the company I worked for would ever open their doors again. They had closed every office. Like everyone, I didn't know if or when or how COVID would even end.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how I was going to keep a roof over our heads, how I was going to educate my children. And again, those fears just spiraled. And my solution, my way to medicate, was to drink. So during COVID, my alcoholism just took control. And
So I have to ask, because I know there have been a few episodes where we've talked about this similarly. What does that look like, if you may? If it's possible for you to go back to that, was it just midday? Was it all day? Was it when I have any type of, as you mentioned, if you felt fear in the morning, would you reach for something? I only ask that because there have been people that have chimed in talking about their own struggles.
yeah, and I'm happy to share mine. And I smile a little bit because when I think back about how insane I became, um, yeah, I'll tell my dailies. Here's what my days became. At the time, my wife's a school teacher, and her school was still open. She worked at a private school,
Okay.
so she would leave the house at about 7 a.m. And at about 7:10 a.m., I would give her a 10-minute head start so we wouldn't end up at the same stoplight. I would leave the house and head over to a liquor store that opened at 7 a.m.
Oh, wow.
And I would pull in and I would buy exactly 3 little mini bottle shots of vodka. And I would do all 3 of them in the parking lot. And there's a reason why I did 3. Um, it was really important for me to be able to jump in the car and go in the case of an emergency. So I knew that I had to keep my blood alcohol level below 0.08. And I had a breathalyzer at home. So I learned that 3 shots of vodka put me up to 0.075, right below the legal limit. So 7:15 a.m., I would do 3 shots. And then I also had calculated and learned that each shot took exactly 1 hour to leave my body. So 7:15, 3 shots. By 9:15, I could do 2 more. And by 11:15, 2 more again. 1:15, 3:15, 5:15. By 5:15, my wife is now home from school. And there was COVID. The only things that were open were grocery stores and liquor stores. So each day we would get in the car. I no longer had to drive because she was now home. We would go to the grocery store, figure out what we were having for dinner. And on the way out, I'd stop in the liquor store right next door. And I would do 3 more shots and bring home a bottle of wine just to get me through the night. And that happened every single day from early March of 2020 until my body completely gave out on December 30th of 2020.
Okay. So when you say your body gave out, I'm sure that that can mean a whole host of things. What was it that happened in your body, and what was the signal? Like, did you wake up one morning and say, I need to go to the hospital, or how did that all come about?
Yeah, there were some early signals. I started having some vision problems that no one could seem to explain. I did see a couple doctors about that. I started having some balance issues that, again, folks, couldn't figure out quite why that was. But on December 30th, that when I say, my body surrendered, I collapsed on the floor about 11 p.m. that evening, and I could not get up. My wife was already upstairs in bed. Thankfully, she had her cell phone with her and had it on. And after trying to get up, I called her and said, something's really wrong. You need to please come help me. Now, by the way, I have no memories of anything that took place from that surrender until I had my complete healing. There's a period of time, and we can get more into that as we move along. But this part of my story, I've learned from what I've been told and from what I've read about in medical records. So on December 30th, my wife, thank God, got me to the hospital. They admitted me, and then I was immediately physically detoxed from alcohol. That process takes, typically 10 to 14 days. For most people, that's the end of it. You're detoxed, you're healthy, and then they release you, and you hope in the hopes that you'll stay sober. That didn't happen for me. Rather than after my physical detox, I started experiencing some really frightening cognitive declines. My brain started rewiring. So I was transferred out of that first hospital, ultimately ending up in a second hospital, again, getting worse each day, not better. And ultimately, my last stop was the lock psych ward at a local hospital here in the Palm Beach area. At that point, they had figured out what was wrong with me. And I had the layman's term for it is wet brain, but the medical term is Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. But that move where I had moved to was full out what's called Korsakoff psychosis. I was insane. I was crazy. I didn't recognize my wife during a Zoom call with her, because during COVID, there was only a few times she was allowed to come in and see me. I said, who are you? I'm not married. And she said, Joe, it's Nicole, I'm your wife. I said, well, you're going to need to bring some documentation for that, because I have no idea who you are. I hallucinated that there were people in the room with me that weren't there. By reading my medical records, I learned that I was often confined because they felt that I was a danger not only to myself, but to other patients and staff. I was completely psychotic.
How long were you deemed psychotic? Yeah.
That went on until early March of 2020 or 2021, I'm sorry. So it was about a 9-week period before I was released from that psych ward. And at the time, what was about to happen was they were going to send me home with my wife with a few 800 numbers to call for resources. But they had said, look, we're a hospital. We're not a long-term care facility. He's yours now. Thankfully, grace of God, my wife found a treatment facility, an alcohol and addiction center, that agreed to take me for 30 days so that my wife wouldn't have that period to figure out what to do with me for the rest of my life. Well, a day after entering that facility, it was as though a switch was flipped. I woke up there and I was perfectly normal as I am having this conversation with you.
So you wake up and you feel normal. What was your first thought?
Well, my first thought is, why am I here? Where am I at? And how did I get here? Because again, we're still in this period where I have no memories. One of the highly documented problems with Korsakoff syndrome, or in Korsakoff psychosis in particular, is people the brain has rewired in such a way that you no longer have the ability to form memory at all. And it's common for those type of patients to have full recall of the first 10 or 20 or 30 years of their lives, and then everything ends. And then they're stuck in this world where each day they can't remember what they did 5 minutes ago, let alone a day ago, a week ago, or a month ago. And that's just like Groundhog Day, it goes on forever. And that's where I was supposed to end up. That's how I was supposed to be for the rest of my life. So I wake up in this facility, no idea how I'd gotten there, and no idea what had happened to me. And over the next few days, I start figuring out, and I realized I was in a treatment facility. I realized that I was not drinking, because obviously they don't serve alcohol there. And over a period of a few days, I started to put the pieces together that, I was sober and I knew how much longer I'd be there. And about a week in, I finally had a phone conversation scheduled with my wife. And that phone call took place in a therapist's office where we were on speakerphone. So it's me and the therapist in the room and my wife on the phone. And at that point, I want desperately to just get out of there and try to repair whatever damage I had already caused. Because remember, I had no memories of what had happened. I just wanted to get home to my wife, apologize, and hope that we'd move on with our lives and everyone would be happy again. Well, in that phone call, after a couple minutes of hi, how are you doing? How you doing? My wife said, Joe, and I could hear her crying now. She said, do you have any idea what you've been through these last few weeks? And I said, I don't have any idea what you're talking about. And she said, well, when you get out, you have to talk to your Aunt Jerry. My Aunt Jerry, by the way, is a nurse who had been kind of quarterbacking all of my medical care, speaking to the doctors and then sharing in English with Nicole what was going on. She said, you need to talk to Aunt Jerry, but Joe, I'm so happy that you're doing well. But when you get out, I will be gone. I've already packed up. I've already spoken to the lawyers. They're drawing up the paperwork, and we're getting a divorce. And I'm so sorry, but that's the way it is. And the therapist cut the phone call off. He said, let's hit the pause button. And in that moment, after we hung up, all I knew is I was sober. I was so deeply in love with my wife. I wanted her back more than anything. And it became clearly obvious it wasn't going to happen. So I'm feeling at that moment more broken than I've ever felt. And the therapist looks me in the eye and he says, Joe, there's an AA meeting starting in 5 minutes and you need to go. And as the tears are running down my face, I said, there's no way I'm going to an AA meeting. And I had never been to one before, by the way. And I said, we were told we don't have to attend those meetings if we don't want to. And he said, you don't have to attend, but you have to go tonight. And I did. And I attended that first meeting of AA, completely broken. I'm literally almost sobbing in the meeting, and I'm in a room with about 50 people. And they started conducting their meeting, and they started the meeting off by reading the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which I knew nothing about, but there was this common thread, and it was God. And I started saying, what has God got to do with this? And then I heard a speaker, someone like me, who had hit a deep, dark bottom and had not only recovered everything he had in his prior life, but his life had become more beautiful and wonderful than he had ever dreamed. And in that moment, I said, I want to be that. So over there, I now had probably about another 3 weeks left in that treatment facility. And when I learned that that program was about God, I started trying to figure that out again. Because a big part of that program is making a decision to surrender your life and your will over to God's care. I wanted to learn how to do that. So I started reading, I started praying, and I now knew that, it was only a matter of days and weeks where I was going to be let go back into the real world, going home to an empty house, getting divorced from my wife, and wanting to be sober more than anything in the world, but not quite sure how I would do that. So fast forward, the last day of my stay in the treatment facility, I'm sitting with a woman who's a therapist, and she's part of the discharge process. And she said, Joe, you get to go home. I'm going to sign your paperwork, but I'm going to ask you to promise me 2 things. And more importantly, to promise yourself 2 things. And she said, number 1, when you get out of here, get to an AA meeting and find a sponsor. And after an adult life of a lot of broken promises, not only to the people around me, but promises to myself that I had broken, I committed to doing that. And she said, number 2, when you get home, and she pulled it up on her computer, she said, Google surrender prayer in all caps. And here's what I found. And she said, print that off and pray it every single day. And I said, okay, I can make those 2 promises. And I did. So that's where my return to faith really started to develop.
I'm having trouble. That's so amazing to think about. And I have to pause for a second to actually. So this was, now we're in April of 2021.
That is correct. So
Okay.
it's April 21. I've been released from the treatment facility. I've tried to, the first day I get out, of course, the first person I tried to reach out to was my wife, Nicole. The divorce wasn't final yet, but it was in movement. And she made it real clear. She said, Joe, I'm begging with you. You need to just let this go. We're getting a divorce. I'm asking and begging you, just let me be. And then I think it may have been my second call was, let's go back to Aunt Jerry, the family member of mine, the nurse who was relaying everything to Nicole after speaking with the doctors. I called my Aunt Jerry. And she says, do you have any idea what you've been through? And I said, no. And I immediately started having a little pity party for myself. Only first thing out of my words, Jerry, can you believe it? Nicole is leaving. And she set me straight immediately. She said, you selfish so-and-so. Do you have any idea what that woman has been through? What I've been through, what your family's been through, and I didn't. And she told me the whole story. So at that moment, I had started developing that faith with God. But in that moment, I knew, because I loved my wife so much, learning of how much pain and darkness and sadness that she had to endure. For the first time in my life, I tried to separate what was good for me from what is good for her. And I stepped away. We got divorced. And at that point, I, continued to those prayers of, or I'm sorry, those promises of surrendering everything to God every day. And I then just tried to rebuild my life without the woman I loved and without alcohol. And each day that started progressing. And it became part of my life, I guess, to just surrender everything. And within a period of time, not that long, a period of a few months, I started to feel that real connection. And my life started to change. And I no longer had any desire or craving or compulsion or obsession to drink. That had been lifted.
Wow.
I had learned that physically what happened to me was absolutely miraculous. I've spoken to doctor after doctor, some who have treated me, some that didn't, that said there's no medical explanation for what happened to you. One of my primary care physicians, who had been my doctor for a number of years, she ran blood work on me soon after I got out. And in addition to realizing, and telling me indeed what had happened was a miracle, she pulled up my old medical chart, and my liver enzymes, this is a little bit, I guess, inside medical terms, but my liver enzymes for a normal person, the normal range is between 1 and 35. And anything over 35, you're starting to do damage to your liver. And if it gets too high over that, you're causing permanent damage. My liver enzymes were over 200 before I had gone in for my treatment. And I remember the doctor appointments with her when she would show me that and say, Joe, you're damaging your liver permanently. And I was an alcoholic. I blew it off. So after my miracle occurred, I go back in and see her again. She runs my blood work and she pulls that up and she goes, Joe, your liver enzymes are perfectly normal. I said, how's that possible? She goes, I don't have an answer. I've never seen it. Not only was I physically healed, but now became really the second miracle. God wasn't done with me yet. As I'm now rebuilding my life on my own, you know, that second miracle was he lifted all of the cravings and any desire to drink, and he, you know, welcomed me with his infinite loving arms, and my everything in my life just started to change.
When did you return to Mass? So you're praying the surrender, that surrender prayer. When did you return to Mass for the first time? And when you say your life was getting better in many respects, what else was happening, you know, with family, if you can speak to that and
Sure.
what followed?
Yeah, I started going to Mass pretty soon after I'd gotten out. I remember, I think I had gone to Mass at 2 or 3 different Catholic churches at the time. And then I even tried a couple non-denominational, Christian churches. But after, I guess, bouncing around for a few weeks, the, the Catholic Church just was my only option. So at the time, I was going to St. Peter Catholic Church, not far from where we used to live. And it started becoming just part of my weekly ritual. And I started to actually look forward each week to going to Mass. And that continued on and continued on. And again, I'm still getting my feet under me and rebuilding my life. But I'll never forget one thing, because again, it's kind of early on, and I'm still scared, and I'm also worried that, you know, what kind of stigma or shame would, you know, follow me around based on what I had done and what I had been through. And I heard the priest at the end of a homily, and I think I'm paraphrasing, but I think I've got it pretty close. He had done a homily about, you know, what is a good Catholic. And he ended it with, you know, heaven is not for the good, heaven's for the forgiven. And whoa, I'm getting teary right now. That gave me hope, because I was a sinner, man. I mean, look it up in the dictionary, my picture's there. And hearing that heaven was for the forgiven just was one of the most memorable moments of my life. And again, deepened my faith. As far as how that my faith continued to progress, I wanted to get involved in serving others. And I knew that was going to be a big part of me building my life. I had this internal desire to start doing for other people. So I had heard over the years that I was related to Father Michael McGivney. And I had read the book that was written about him a number of years ago, Parish Priest. And, you know, we knew in our family we were related. And I had thought about, man, maybe I should look into Knights of Columbus over the years, but I never bothered. And then I think it was maybe in July of 2021, I was scheduling an appointment to have someone come by and pressure wash at the house. And the guy who answered took my name down and he says, McGivney, are you related to Father Michael McGivney from Blood Knights of Columbus? I said, I am. He said, are you a knight? And I said, no. And he very sternly said, why the hell not? And I thought about it for a minute after we hung up, and I said, it's a great question. I don't have an answer. So I Googled Knights of Columbus nearby, and there were a number of different councils, and I ended up joining the one at St. Peter Church here in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, with Jupiter for that council. And this is where it gets really beautiful. My Aunt Jerry, that nurse who had quarterbacked everything, she and I, soon after I got out, developed this tradition of a morning phone call every Saturday morning. I think initially she just wanted to check in on me and to be a support system if I was stumbling. But it quickly became these beautiful conversations, sometimes an hour. There have been times we've talked for 3 hours. And we talked about faith, and we talked about, you know, our lives with each other. You know, we talked about what was going on in each other's world. And she became kind of a spiritual guide for me, because I now wanted to get all in with the Catholic Church, and I wanted to learn about traditions. And I was so excited to have found this connection with not only God, but with the church that I'd never had. And she's a pretty devout Catholic, so she was educating me through all this. Anyway, during one of those calls, I joined the Knights on, I believe it was August 2nd of 2021. And in our following, the phone call following me joining, I said, "Oh, Jerry, by the way, guess what I did this week?" "What?" I said, "Well, I joined the Knights of Columbus." Now I'm expecting her to be really happy. Instead, she's sobbing. And I said, "Jerry, what's going on? I thought you'd be excited about this." And she said, "Joe, you have no idea. I've never told you this, but when you were really sick and we were all praying for you all the time, I was praying fervently to Father Michael." And she said, "In fact, I'm looking at his picture right now." And that piece now started to, you know, work through my head. I said, wait a minute. I had started learning about Father Michael because I had just joined the Knights, and I said, wow, I'm a miracle. Is it possible that he interceded on my behalf? And long story short, Jerry, at that point, I had led her to fathermcgivney.org, where there's about a 25-minute video that it's a beautiful video that tells the story of the history of Father McGivney and the Knights of Columbus. But on that website, there's a section where you can report favors, I believe they call it, meaning they're looking for, hey, if you believe Father McGivney's intercession led to a miracle in your life, please let us know, because they're looking for the second miracle they need for him to become Saint Michael McGivney. And my Aunt Jerry said, "Do you mind if I submit your miracle?" I said, "Of course not. Go ahead." And pretty soon, I think within a day of her submitting her little paragraph about what had happened, Knights of Columbus, the vice postulator for the cause for canonization, reached back out to her and said, "Can you give us his info, and would he be willing to talk to us?" And it was yes and yes. And there were a few interviews, which led to the Columbia Magazine article, which led to also there's a video profile about my miracle on the Knights of Columbus YouTube channel, in which all of that has continued to lead to further deeper involvement with Knights of Columbus. In fact, I was asked to speak at a state convention last year, which had 800 people. I'll be speaking at one in a couple of weeks over on the west coast of Florida, which I think will be a couple hundred. But anyway, now knowing that Blessed Michael's intercession is more than likely the reason I stand here today is just, it's so, I mean, the gratitude, I can't even begin to explain it.
So the investigation is underway as it relates to the cause for canonization, or how does that, I don't know how all of that works. But.
Yeah, my understanding of the process, and this is, I don't want to pretend to be an expert on this either, because I'm not, Eddie, but I know a thing or two about it. the first miracle that was attributed to Father Michael's intercession occurred a couple of weeks or months before my little medical adventure began. And that's when he was raised up to bless it. They're still waiting for the second miracle. To my knowledge, I'm almost certain that they have not submitted my miracle to the Vatican at this point. In fact, I'm almost 100% certain of that, because I think I'd know by now, because that whole process involves documenting records and interviews, and it's a big thing, big process. So where they are in that process, I can't speak to that because I just don't know.
No.
But I know that I like to think, and this is my words, not theirs, that, maybe I'm in the bullpen or, the on deck circle for whether they're going to, ultimately submit my miracle, but I have no idea.
Now, what about the here and now as it relates to working on relationships, family relationships, if you can speak to that a little bit?
I can. So my wife and I did get divorced, and we both started trying to live our lives without each other. And what went from no communication started to be these occasional a text here. Oh, did I leave something in the garage before I left? Yeah, you did. And God brought us back together again. And
I have never done this emotional. I don't even know what to do with all these emotions right now, but go ahead.
No, it's okay. So we had gotten divorced, and we were living our lives apart. And ultimately, God kind of started bringing us slowly and surely back together. And God bless her, my wife one day reached out and had the courage, and it took a lot of courage to say, I love you and I want us to be together again. And I think we both, in the months it took for that to happen, both of our lives changed. Mine certainly, after knowing of my miracle and knowing that I still deeply loved her, but also was staying away from her because I wanted nothing more. I wanted her happiness way more than I wanted mine. And I think maybe it took some time, number one, for her to heal, because she had been traumatized. I mean, what she went through in that 9-week period was nobody should have to ever endure. Number one, and number two, I think it took time for her to say, you know what, maybe he's changed. Even in the brief conversations she and I had before we actually started dating again, she just said, you're different. You're a different person. And ultimately we ended up getting remarried. The other beautiful thing that's happened is, going back to how often when did you start going back to church? That became something we shared. During all the years we had been together prior to that, we never went to Mass together, ever, because we weren't going to Mass. It just wasn't a part of our lives. So it had become a part of mine, and she said, well, I want to go too. And so that became so important to us that, when we're on vacations, we find a church. When, we can't make, for whatever reason, the Mass we usually go to, we find a parish that has a later one. It's just a huge part of our lives, and something I look so forward to. I've learned to love. For me, I want to begin to be a expert on Catholicism. I'm not a biblical scholar, not a theologian, but I've started trying to learn everything I can about my faith. And my wife is actually going through RCIA right now, and I'm going through it with her because she had never been baptized. And I think I'm loving it more than she is, or equally, I should say, because, when I learned everything I learned as a child, I don't remember any of it. But I think also we have this shared belief that we need to surrender everything to God. And that has become part of both of our lives. And as a result, our marriage is more wonderful not only than it ever was prior, but more beautiful than I could have ever even imagined a marriage to be. We're now living in a world that to me was a fantasy that I didn't even know how to reach to. Now it's real. It's the life we live, and we both are giving back and trying to be people of service at every opportunity that we can get. Yeah, it's just a beautiful world. And then the other relationships, the relationships with my children, both of them are in college right now, and they had to endure that same fear over my 9-week period. What's gonna happen to them? And they could have, chosen to say, look, I want nothing more to do with you, Dad. I can't do this anymore either. And instead they both, again, just welcomed me back with complete unconditional love. And the relationship that we all have together as a family is, again, I use the word beautiful, but it's more beautiful than it's ever been. And I wake up every morning so grateful for all of this. And I've also learned that I have to continue surrendering it at that every single day and never take that for granted. And for me, at the end of the day, I'm still human, and I still get what I call sideways up in this little brain of mine. And sometimes my fear and my anxiety or my resentments, whatever it is, will take over, or at least attempt to, for a little bit. There's a saying I learned over a couple of years ago, saying I'm not allowed to go into my head without adult supervision. Well, I've taken that one step further. I've now learned that when I'm, getting sideways, not only I'm only allowed to go into my head if I invite God to join me. And while I read that prayer every morning, there are days when I read it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. Whenever those old habits starts, playing around in my brain, I've learned that the solution to that is just give it back to God. And he takes it back every single time.
Amen to that, Joe. My goodness gracious. You have no idea what this has meant to me. And I don't know what it was about the story, but my goodness. Yeah, it was messing with me in a very good way, And I deeply respect the fact that that you're willing to share this, obviously, and to hear about your wife, the saint, and your children, future saints. That's just you talk about that homily and how that homily ended. Well, to see that type of forgiveness in your family is absolutely fantastic. And I also would say it's not just edifying for me, but there are many people, obviously, that are probably in the midst of many that are in the midst of alcoholism. I don't know how many people are going to have that same case that you had, but I do know that people go searching for answers online, often on YouTube. And my prayer is that people can open their ears, open their hearts to what you just put out there. And that's what I've got to say. Is there anything else you want to add, Joe?
No, I want to thank you for the opportunity, because Um, what I believe is, yeah, I was saved for a reason, a purpose, and I do my best to never say no to anyone who asks me to tell my story, because I believe that my purpose here today is, one, to help advance the cause for canonization for Blessed Michael; two, to help other struggling alcoholics or addicts, and hearing my story may give someone the hope and the courage to reach out for help; or three, hearing about how God is still at work in our world, that may bring someone closer to their faith or back to their faith. So if I can accomplish any one of those things today and each day, that's a beautiful world for me.
Agreed. Well, thanks again, Joe. Everyone who watched or listened to this, please share it. As I say, please comment, please like, forward it to people that, I think you just nailed it, Joe. It's not just about alcoholism. It's not even, you could just group everything as an addiction, but you could take it even further and say how many of us need to surrender on a daily basis, and renew those baptismal vows and fight like hell for the truth. And so I'll leave everyone with that. And until next time, take care and God bless.